The governor of New Mexico, Lujan Grisham, landed herself in hot water recently for what I'll just call an attempted 30-day suspension of the Second Amendment. Needless to say, this civil order was unlawful and short-lived as it violated both state law and the Constitution. Consequently, the enforcement of this order was temporarily blocked by a U.S. district judge. You may have seen the clip where she was asked if she actually believed that this would stop criminals from carrying guns, and she said no. So even she admits that it won't stop any violent crimes. She explains that it's really about sending a message to the community, quote, to do something different. What are the law-abiding citizens in Albuquerque really expect to do about the crime problem if they can't even protect themselves? Isn't the point of the legal system and the law enforcement system to deal with crime? She also basically says that crime is out of control and that she's doing all she can about it. This speaks volumes about her because it demonstrates that she's not really understanding how to deal with violent crime to begin with. Human-caused problems, like crime, don't just get worse for no reason. Albuquerque's crime problem didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of not doing enough to get where it is today. Without a real understanding on how to minimize crimes and violence, she reverts to an ideological position, gun control, and blindly hopes that it will somehow work, even though she understands that there is no logical reason why this gun control would work. I'll explain why Albuquerque got so violent, but I first want to show some more quotes from the governor. Shortly after she explained that we need to send a message to law-abiding citizens, she mentioned that crimes, even violent ones, people are calling the police for help, and the police are not showing up to do anything. So she knows she's starting off with a lack of an appropriate police response to violent crime, and she's deciding to complement that with a situation where people generally can't protect themselves. For a plan supposedly intended to save lives, it would fail badly at this goal, because it would probably have the opposite effect. Even though her wording is a little vague, she's obviously talking about calling the police, because you don't call just anyone to report a violent crime. The governor also explains that she sees constitutional rights as something that can be overruled when there is an emergency. So when constitutional rights can be discarded whenever convenient, then rights guarantee nothing. Another quote shows that this belief is not specific to the Second Amendment, and that other rights could be up for grabs if they are also inconvenient. With this sort of logic, freedom of speech would also be in danger, especially if dissenting opinions become a little too unpleasant. The governor also makes it clear that she knows that responsible gun owners are not the problem. Yet she clearly wants them arrested, because that is the point of this plan. She is holding two contradictory beliefs, but favoring the one that does not reflect reality because it is the one her party prefers. This is basically a dictionary definition of George Orwell's term doublethink. In comparison, there wouldn't be such a backlash if she simply wanted to arrest more violent criminals and increase police funding. Considering how bad the crime has gotten, such a policy would be very popular among the citizens of New Mexico, especially the ones who have experienced violent crime firsthand. Now we get to the heart of the original problem, the reasons why crime got so bad in the first place. Criminals are not facing sufficient consequences for their actions, and the results are more crime. Part of the lack of the consequences has to do with criminals being released without bail. The reason we have so many criminals being released without bail and on their own recognizance goes back to a 2014 New Mexico Supreme Court ruling. Detective Sean Willoughby of the Albuquerque Police Association points out that there is a soft-on-crime approach at the state legislature level. He mentions that there are certain policies that effectively tie the hands of police and disincentivize arresting the criminals. The obvious result is that the law enforcement cannot do their jobs to protect the citizens of the community. He says that police are significantly understaffed and that bad policies have resulted in less officers on the street. Finally, he mentions that because of the amount of scrutiny officers are under, the lack of support, and the defund the police movement, current officers are quitting and no new people are lining up to replace them. Though with Albuquerque in particular, we have national problems stacking on state-level problems, stacking on local problems like individual gang and drug-related violence, with the obvious result being very high crime. People will obviously want to compare the 30-day attempted suspension of the Second Amendment to other events in history. Across history, there have been times of great crisis where parts of the Constitution have been suspended. For example, the suspension of habeas corpus, which is the constitutional right intended to prevent people from being imprisoned or detained without a fair trial. One of the most well-known examples of this was during the Civil War, when Lincoln suspended habeas corpus and declared martial law. Also, during Reconstruction after the Civil War, Ulysses S. Grant suspended habeas corpus in South Carolina to aid in the fight to stop the KKK. These older examples were much more justifiable and understandable because they were pretty extreme situations that actually required immediate action. In contrast, the current situation we have is a governor picking a specific day to say that crime is now a crisis that requires immediate action. These problems of increased crime have been going on for a while now, and surely she could have done some things when she was first elected to help reduce crime before things got bad and more people were killed. It's obviously easy for me to criticize her and say that she should have done more in the past, but it's hardly a cheap shot or an unfair thing to say. Violent crime obviously endangers the health and safety of her citizens. It's not unreasonable to expect a governor to make the health and safety of her citizens a top priority from day one. If you were an aircraft mechanic, for example, you wouldn't have to know anything about violent crime to do your job well. Being the governor is a bit different in that respect, and we should hold governors to an appropriately higher standard. I want to make one more comparison. In the 2005 aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, the New Orleans Police Department ordered the confiscation of all citizen-owned guns. This also left citizens vulnerable in a lawless and violent situation. This gun control didn't make sense from a logical standpoint either, and it clearly demonstrated that government was willing to ignore your rights when convenient. Rights are not there to be discarded at the first sign of trouble. They are there to ensure that we are protected from our government's wrongdoings even in times of crisis. Especially in times of crisis.